Hi, I'm Devin Walters. What I'm hoping to do here is to get conversations started on the upcoming lectionary text for our church, but my hope is that whoever's watching this, if it's on Facebook or YouTube or wherever, that our attention would go to the gospel and conversation would happen. Both here online, which you'll see at the bottom of this, there'll be a few questions. I really would invite you and encourage you to answer those honestly and have some dialogue back and forth with me and with other people. But then also take it to your churches on Sunday morning. Talk with people there, see what their thoughts are, and close up after your Sunday worship experience by coming back on and telling me how that went and sharing your stories with one another. So with all that said, this upcoming Sunday at our church, we're looking at Mark chapter 12, 38 through 44. So I'm going to start by reading that and give you a few thoughts on it. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogue and the place of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." In our church we say, "This is the word of the Lord." And everybody, of course, responds, "Thanks be to God." I started doing research on this text, and ironically, every single story I came across to support this text had to do with giving. One story in particular caught my attention. It reads as this: "A priest once asked one of his parishioners to serve as financial chairman of his parish. The man, manager of a grain elevator, agreed on 2 conditions. No report would be due for a year, and no one would make any questions during that year. At the end of the year, he made his report. He had paid off the church debt of $200,000. He had redecorated the church. He had sent money to missions. He had $5,000 in the bank." Needless to say, everyone wanted to know how. The man quietly explained, "You people bring your grain to my elevator. As you did business with me, I simply withheld 10% and gave it to the church. You never missed it." That was from David E. Linginger, The View from Jesus' Pew. I don't want to talk about money today. A lot of churches go that direction with this text. I think the church might have overstepped its bounds on how we encourage people to use their money or not. I instead want to focus on what Jesus is talking here in the context of it. The context is this: just shortly before this, right before this, Jesus is teaching on the greatest commandment, to love God and love your neighbor. Jesus is now comparing scribes, or teachers of the law, to widows. And he starts by talking about these flowing robes. Now, if you'll recall with me, Joseph, the son of Jacob, the son of Israel. Genesis 37, 3 through 4 says this: "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves." Now, what is wrong with having a long robe with sleeves? It means you don't work. It means you get to sit back and watch while the rest of your brothers do all the work. And we know that the brothers didn't like this. Verse 4 says, "But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him." So what happens to poor Joseph? His brothers plot to kill him. They stage a death by wild animals, but instead, really, they put him in a ditch. Say, "Oh, that'll be good enough. We don't want his blood on our hands. We'll just let him starve." Well, then they get this even better idea. Why not profit from this? And so they sell him to a caravan, they take the money, and then they take this nice beautiful robe back to their father and says, oops, we don't know what happened to him. I guess the animals got him. I'm sure those listening to Jesus talk about the Pharisees, the scribes, the religious leaders, the teachers of the law. This story's going on in the back of their mind. Robe, oh yeah. But what other things or what other stories do we know about robes? Well, let's think for a moment to the prodigal son in Luke. It's Luke 15:22. This son goes off after telling his dad, I wish you were dead and give me my share of the inheritance. This is not a popular thing to do, and I don't encourage anybody to do this. But this is what the story tells us. He goes off, and he wastes all of his money. He's hanging out with the wrong crowd. He's doing the wrong thing. Finally, he wakes up one morning noticing that he's tempted to eat the food that is set out for pigs, the worst of the worst animals within the Jewish culture. He comes to his senses and he says, this is ridiculous. My servants back at my father's house are living much better than I am. I'm going to go there. I'm going to make up some story, convince my dad to let me live as a servant. And we all know this story. As he's going back, his father sees him in the distance and runs across the town to go to him and throws his arms around him. And what does he say? Verse 22 says, but the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And the brother's response, much like Joseph's, what in the world are you doing? So these are just kind of a couple of stories that go through my mind when I think of robes. And Jesus says at this point, watch out for these teachers of the law who like to walk around in flowing robes. They're not doing the work. They're hypocrites. They say one thing, yet do another. This is the warning that Jesus makes in Matthew 23, 2-3, which is kind of the parallel of this text today. He says, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach, but do not practice. Next, Jesus attacks how they like to go into the marketplace and be greeted. What's so wrong about being greeted? I like to walk through the store and know people there. The problem here, though, is why are people running up to them? Why are they going up to these priests or these religious leaders or these teachers of the law? It's because they're going to be the ones that can pass out goods. Oh, yes, come give me a hug. Oh, everybody come welcome me. Oh, here's some change. They're buying the people's love. Matthew 6:2 tells us, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received the reward in full. These teachers of the law are trying to earn people's love. They're trying to become popular and honored by men. Jesus says, do not have anything to do with them. Next, he talks about these important seats. And again, we've already looked at this in Matthew 23:2, but it's Moses' seat. Now, what exactly is Moses' seat? Well, when we look at Exodus 18, verse 13, Moses sits as judge for the people. Now think about this. So Moses was asked by God to go and lead his people out of Egypt, out of slavery, and go off into the promised land. And he succeeds through God's work, because God does all these miraculous signs. God's making a name for himself. He's telling the world, look, I am real. Well, the Israelites finally leave their captives of Egypt. They go out, and now they're going to Moses. Moses has had face-to-face encounters with God. Moses has gone up the mountain and come down with the commandments. Moses knows what's going on. And so they're going to Moses and asking him, what should I do, this or that? What's correct? How should we interpret this? Teach us. Help us out. And what he does is he sits there as judge. Exodus 18:13 tells us that Jethro, his father-in-law, tells him, this isn't good for you, nor is it good for the people. Rather, he should teach them the statutes and the instructions, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things they are to do. Not judge. Teach, not judge. Yet this is exactly, again, what the teachers of the religious law are doing. They're trying to have these important seats in the synagogue. They're trying to take Moses' seat. They're trying to judge people. They're setting up more boundaries. Jesus goes on further to say that they are wanting the honored place at banquets. Contrast this what Jesus says about this in Luke 14:8. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. They thought they were the most distinguished. These teachers of the law said, we're the ones that have it all together. We're the ones that should be in the seat of honor. And lastly, we see devouring widows' houses and for show make lengthy prayers. Nobody really knows what that means, the devouring widows' houses. And maybe you do, listening to this. I'd encourage you to write that in the comments below. But the commentaries I looked at said, does this mean that they would go and stay at a widow's house while traveling and they would stay past their welcome? My grandfather always said, having guests at your house is like fish. It's great for the first couple of days, but then it really starts to stink. Possibly that's it. Possibly, again, it's these regulations that they're putting on. But for whatever reasons, Jesus is pointing out that they devour the widow's house. And for show, they make these lengthy prayers. The point is this, on the outside, they might look like they've got it all together. It looks like they are God's people in charge. But on the inside, they're really quite nasty, greedy, selfish people. And this is kind of Jesus' theme throughout Mark. It's not what goes into the body that makes it unclean. Rather, it's what comes out of the body that makes it unclean. That comes from Mark 7:15. To put it another way, Matthew 23:26 says, you blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of your cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. If only you could see my desk right now. I've got about 2 different coffee mugs they're nice on the outside, but they're quite nasty on the inside. I'm not going to subject you to looking into those. I think we can get the clearest picture here, though, from Luke 12:34. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And Jesus says it's these teachers of the law that we're supposed to watch out for. For the people that act like this, the selfish, the ones that are out for themselves, these are the type of the people we should watch out for. So the interesting thing is, out of any single human being that has ever lived, ever walked this face of the earth, Jesus had the most right to live exactly like how he's saying we shouldn't. He had the right to a royal robe, for Jesus is the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He is God incarnate, the creator of the whole entire universe, come down into human flesh. Who above anybody else has that right for that flowing royal robe but Jesus? Yet he doesn't take that. He comes to serve. He is our king, though. Nonetheless, he came to serve. And then we see these people wanting to be greeted in the marketplace to hand out food. Well, really here, Jesus is the one that can do that. We see him feeding 5,000 men plus women and children at one time using just a few loaves of bread and a fish. You tell me, who's the one that can provide for us? Sitting in these powerful seats in the synagogues, sitting on Moses' seat. Who is the good judge who sits at the right hand of God, judging not the outward appearance, where, frankly, we all make mistakes. Our outward appearance is where people can see, gosh, they don't have it all together. Gosh, they are making mistakes. We're not perfect, internally or externally, but it's this outward appearance that people can at least see, gosh, they're not perfect. But rather, Jesus doesn't even look at that. He looks at the heart. He looks at our intent. So although as I act it out, it might not come across very well, Jesus doesn't look at how it comes across, nor how well I do it. He looks at the intent, at our heart. We see the religious leaders, the teachers of the law, going to banquets and wanting to be in the best spot. Rather, with Jesus, though, he's the one throwing the banquet. He's the host, the heavenly host. I'm thinking more along the lines of the Eucharist. And he invites all to come. Not only does Jesus then show us how to pray as well, versus the lengthy for show prayers. He says, go into your room, into a quiet place, and say, Our Father who is in heaven, who is holy. You know the rest of it. But then he also will pray on our behalf. The Holy Spirit prays on our behalf through Jesus to the Father. Jesus is the one passing the prayers on for us. He's the one going to the Father and saying, yeah, Devin's with me. He's okay. Let me tell you what he's asking for. You see, the answer truly is that we can look to the teachers of the law as our priests, or we can look at our true high priest, which is Jesus, the only one that can actually explain the law and fulfill the law. Put it another way, it's Hebrews 9:24 through 28, which is the other part of the lectionary text for this week. And it says, For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly, as the high priests enter the holy places every year with blood not his own. For then he would have to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the age to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. We looked at this text as a group of men on Wednesday morning Bible study, and one of them put it this way: when you're eating a ham and egg breakfast, who's more invested, the chicken or the pig? The priest, whatever their intent might be, doesn't bring their own blood. The true high priest, Jesus, does bring his own blood. He's invested to the point of death. And so now we look at this contrast of the widow. And what I have to ask is, which is more, 10% of your earnings or everything you have? And this is what Jesus looks at. He sees this woman giving her 2 copper coins, the lepta, which makes up, 2 of those make up a quadrans, which is a Roman copper coin worth 1/64th of a denarius being a day's wage. So if you play a little math here, minimum wage in Washington is $9.47 an hour. 1/64th of an 8-hour workday is 15 minutes. So this woman has dropped in the equivalent of $2.37. She's dropped in what we would spend for a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But is that the point Jesus is making? What she has really dropped in is all of her trust. She is trusting that God will provide for all of her needs. She is trusting that God will take her act of worship and that God will smile. She is giving everything. She's holding nothing back, pushing all idols aside and giving everything to worship God. Right before this text, Jesus was teaching on the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Who's doing that here between the scribes, that is, the teachers of the law, and the widow? Who's truly loving God with all that they are? What does Jesus see? He sees the heart of what we do. He sees how we love God and how we love others. This is what God is after. He's not after our money. That's not God's intent. What God is after is our hearts. So what does it look like to trust God above everything else? What does it look like to worship our true high priest? What does it look like to offer your heart to God? Thank you for listening. And again, I encourage you, answer these questions below in the comments, and let's have this conversation continue on. Blessings on you.